Hey folks, this is Shane. Thanks for checking out this Ham Radio 101 for the prepared slide presentation on the Scout 75 channel. We'll make this one short and sweet because it's kind of a boring topic and nobody wants to spend all their time going over this, so let's just dive in. Do you really need a ham radio license? Short answer is yes, and we'll go over that in this presentation, along with why people don't want to get a license in the first place, what you can do without a license, what you can do with a license, a little background on the history and why we have licenses in the first place, and then the three classifications of licenses in the United States, some study guides and tips, and we'll wrap things up. So let's dive right in. Why people don't want to get a license? Well, there's basically only a handful of reasons. It comes down to privacy, time commitment, and not wanting to fail at it, basically. Simply, a lot of people don't think the government needs to be involved. They see it as infringement on their rights. Just and kind of a segue into that is just general privacy. Not only do they don't want government involved, but when you get a call sign, that can be looked up on the internet to see who you are and where you live. So keep that in mind. If you don't want your address given out if you get a license, make sure you fill out with a P.O. box. So a little pro tip there. But probably the biggest reason is people just simply don't want to invest the time and resources into getting a license. It takes time to study. You have to buy a study guide and pay for a test, go someplace to take a test. It's just basically a hassle. And the underlining thing of that is people don't want to invest hours of studying and pay $20 for a book and get confused and go and fail a test. So that's pretty much why people don't want to get a license. So let's go down that route a little bit, shall we? Say you got a radio and you don't have a license, you don't have any intentions of getting one. Fine. There's still a lot of things you can do with a radio legally without getting the license, and that's, of course, is listening. You have 2 ears, 2 eyes, and 1 mouth for a reason. Listening is the most useful function you can get from a radio because you're gathering information. You can listen in on weekly club nets and repeaters, and you can learn the protocol and how people typically talk on a radio. So in the event of a true emergency, you know what to do. You can listen in on when there's severe weather or natural disasters, Skywarn, Aries, Races. All that stuff will be fantastic information, first-hand information on what's going on as far as earthquake, tornado, severe weather, hurricane, what have you. And besides monitoring the amateur radio bands, there's much more you can monitor. Most importantly, emergency services. Most of these handheld radios you can listen in on EMS, fire, some law enforcement channels with the agencies don't have them encrypted. So you can really get a pulse on what's going on. Again, when it comes to a natural disaster, knowing where the fire trucks are, etc. That could be very useful stuff. Another thing that's kind of overlooked is municipalities and utilities. Gas and electric companies will have radio communications in their trucks. Highway departments will too. A good example is I live up in northern Wisconsin in the wintertime. It's kind of handy to listen in to the plow trucks and see where they're at, how the road conditions are firsthand from the guys out plowing the snow. So all that information's out there. You don't need a license. You can gather that. It can be useful. And of course, in a true emergency where there's a chance of loss of life or a serious injury, lost hiker situations, what have you, then you can call for help. But keep in mind, without practice, how effective would you really be? That's the question you gotta ask yourself. So with that, what can you do with a license? Kind of a thing I went over a little bit too much in the first presentation. If you made it through that, I appreciate it. But practice. You get to work your radio, prove out your gear, get your techniques down, have the skills to use your radio in a true emergency where you can adjust the power settings to extend the battery life, to get the extended range you need. Uh, you know, how the ins and outs of your radio and other gear, an external antenna, power supplies, etc., etc. And when you're practicing with it, when you use a license or you have a license, you're not going to be drawing unwanted attention to yourself. If you get on frequencies and you're not using a call sign, hams won't, not only they will not respond to you, but they'll take note and kind of pay attention that there's somebody without a call sign talking on bands that are designated to amateur radio operator use. Uh, Basically, it comes down to they made the effort to get a license, and they kind of want to make sure that everyone else does too. And if you try to use like a fake call sign, well, you're going to get called out on that. Like I mentioned before, call signs can be easily looked up, and they are not random letters and numbers. Fakes will be noticed right away, so don't draw attention to yourself. Then, as I've mentioned in previous videos, you get access to clubs. You can get on the repeater nets. You can meet these people and network with them. Learn the ins and outs of your radio. Get recommendations for other gear, etc., etc., etc. And you also get access to competent professional training on emergency radio use for like Skywarn, Aries, Races, etc., etc. And the other cool thing is you can own your own repeater, which includes a portable repeater that you can use for emergency purposes. So, stuff to keep in mind. I honestly think the pros outweigh the cons. Getting a license is pretty straightforward. So, let's talk about the license a little bit. In the United States, the American Radio Relay League is the governing body. It is not directly controlled by the government, but it does work closely with the FCC. One of kind of an interesting side note for historical purposes, one of the co-founders was Hiram Percy Maxim. If that name sounds familiar, his father, Hiram Maxim, invented the Maxim machine gun and a bunch of other stuff. Hiram Percy Maxim, his son, similar lifestyle. He's an avid inventor. He was the guy who patented the first firearm silencer. And among other things, he was into amateur radio. Back in that day, there wasn't a national networks to be able to get information directly from one coast to the other. You had to relay that information through telegraph and radio. So it was very founding to make sure that there was a standard for frequency uses, protocols, how to relay a message. So that's where it all comes down to. And it basically is where it remains today. A lot of stuff you get with the license is how to follow a very simple protocol to make sure you get the information communicated correctly, using the bands properly. There's segments of the radio bands are dedicated just to voice. Some are just to digital or CW, Morse code. So keeping everything organized in kind of a gentleman's agreement type way really makes life easy. So I know nobody likes the government telling them what to do all the time. Well, most people don't. But this is no different than getting a fishing license or driving on the right side of the road instead of whatever side you want. It's just that kind of thing. So enough about that. The tests are given by amateur volunteers, and the license fees are currently very minimal. This covers the administrative costs the way license fees should be, in my opinion. And in the US, there's 3 levels of license, and we'll quickly go over that next. The first level, the entry-level license, if you will, is called a technician. Offers the majority of the privileges that you're going to want. If you're the prepared-minded type person, it'll give you access to the UHF VHF frequencies and some of the HF ones. So your Baofeng, you'll be able to do everything you can with that legally. Or any of your handhelds or mobile radios in the dual band area. You'll be able to get access to clubs, which I keep hitting over and over again, where you can network with other like-minded people, get some training, get tips on gear, how to, you may find an old pro that has the same radio as you. It can show you all the things that you can't figure out from watching YouTube videos or reading the manual. So that kind of stuff is pretty cool. So in my opinion, everybody in a group, whether it's a family set, neighborhood group, or prepper group, or whatever, I think everyone should get a tech license. You'll just be set up. Test is relatively simple. Just some basic radio information and electrical knowledge. There's no Morse code that you have to do. It's no big deal. I think 99% of the people watching this video can easily pass it. The middle license, and this license I have, is the general. You get all the privileges from a technician license, plus access to majority of the HF bands. So now you're talking worldwide communications. I'd recommend at least one person in a group have this, kind of like I hid before. Strategic advantages of being able to network long range and listen in long range. The test is not much more difficult than the technician. Many people who only plan to get tested for the tech end up getting this general license and passing it with ease. I'm an example of that. I had no intention of getting general. I started studying for the tech, and then I looked into the general, and it wasn't that much more work. So since I was in it, I just did it. No big deal. But keep in mind, anybody can listen to the high frequency bands, just like anybody with a Baofeng radio can listen to everything on that. So even if you have a group where nobody in the group wants to invest the time to get the general license, maybe you still want to get an HF radio so you can listen in. Just food for thought. And then the final license, that is the extra. Again, you get all the privileges of the general and the technician class. You get access to every band that's set aside for the amateur use, but there's really no advantage over general, in my opinion, because majority of the people who are on HF have a general license, so the extras, if they want to talk to more people, they're going to be hanging out where the generals are. This kind of makes sense. But I guess you can work in an area that's a little bit quieter if you want to have a little more private conversations, I guess. The test is quite a bit harder. There's more questions and they're more technical. But it may be worth pursuing for somebody that wants that additional knowledge, that, be able to be useful in a grid down situation long term. But it's mostly just bragging rights. So, now that we went over what the licenses are, let's talk quickly about studying for a license. The tests for tech in general are only 35 questions. And I think I can't remember the percentage, but you only have to get like 83% right. It's not that big of a deal. Test for extra is 50, but we don't worry about that because nobody watching this is probably going to get it. All the questions are multiple choice, and they come from a pool of different questions. So if you go in a group of 25 people, all those 25 people are probably not going to take the same test. They're going to be a slightly different test of 35 questions, but all those questions will come out of the same pool. There are study manuals available from several sources, including the ARRL. The books that I purchased were from a gentleman by the name of Gordon West. I highly recommend his books. I'll put a link in the description where you can get these off of Amazon. His books are a little corny the way they're written, to be honest, but great information. Each section you go through some general, just a general textbook type background on what you're going to be studying, and then it lists off every single question that is going to be on the test. The actual questions, and all the answers. And then after that, it'll go into detail why the correct answer is correct. So you got all that information right there. If you look at the picture, that's a picture of my book for the technical class, or excuse me, the technician class. And you see what I did. What I did, this is what I would recommend, is I just read that book cover to cover. Then I went through again on the test part, and I went through and I highlighted the correct answer. And then after I read it cover to cover, just for a reference, I go through there and I just read the question, read the correct answer, read the question, read the correct answer. If it didn't make sense, I'd read the description of why that answer is correct. And I totally ignored the incorrect answers, so that way when I took the test, the correct answer would jump out at me. That was, well, that's multiple choice 101, I guess, if you know what the questions are going to be. Also available is some great resources online. If you go to YouTube, which you're on now, check out the Ham Radio Crash Course channel. That is an awesome source. Josh, the guy that runs that channel, he's got a playlist for where he goes right through this book for the technical, or I keep saying technical, the technician license and the general license. A lot more interesting than this video, so check that out. There's also a host of apps you can get for your smartphone. The one that I use personally is called Ham Prep. I think it was like 99 cents. And it has the same thing. It has some study aids that you can go through, or you can take mock tests with the real test questions and everything. And you can just go through, and once you go through that and you're constantly getting like 90% success, you're ready for to take the test. And then also there's hamstudy.org. That's an online resource where you will get a lot of information from. Check that out, if you will. So now you're studied up. How do you get your license? Tests are offered by and at amateur radio clubs. If you go to the ARRL website and you can do a search by your zip code, you can find where classes are being done in person. At the time of this recording, it's the end of 2020, so things aren't really done in person much right now. So back to that hamstudy.org, they offer online testing, so you can go to that great resource. You can study all you want, and you can actually take the tests online through them. So there you have it. I buzzed through that pretty quick. Didn't want to bore you. Hopefully you found the information useful. Again, I got some links to some better channels in the description, along with where you can get some of these study guides off of Amazon. So if you find that information useful, I hope you did. And probably catch you on the next one.